The bourbon bottle slipped from my fingers and rolled across my brother's floor, right as my wife whispered his name like it belonged to her. Her hand was already halfway up his thigh. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just stared at the same two people I'd trusted more than anyone, now tangled in a lie they wore like a second skin. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came the next morning, when a courier dropped off divorce papers calling me unstable, said I was slipping, said I was losing my mind. That's when I opened the old metal box they'd forgotten I kept, the one with 50 years of records, clean, dated, unshakable. They thought I'd walk away in shame, but I'd come to visit my brother, and what I heard inside gave me the one thing they never planned for: leverage. My name is Raymond Ellison, and I'm 75 years old. After 50 years at the steel mill, I settled into what should have been an easy retirement in my riverside home. Each morning starts the same, steam rising from my coffee mug while I watch the cottonwoods sway, my workbench in the garage still spotted with decades of oil stains, and the familiar creak of the porch boards beneath my feet. My wife Margaret has grown distant lately, making hushed phone calls and sharing private jokes with my brother Thomas during their increasingly frequent chance meetings. I eat most dinners alone now, watching her car disappear down the drive for another unexplained errand. What they don't know is that my old metal file box holds every receipt, deed, and pension record from the past 50 years. But let me start from the beginning. I'd bought that bottle of bourbon 2 towns over, the good stuff Thomas always bragged about but never splurged on himself. My brother had this laugh, you know, the kind. Started deep in his chest and worked its way up like thunder rolling through hills. I figured I'd hear it tonight when I surprised him with that bottle. The county road stretched dark ahead of me, empty except for the occasional glint of reflectors marking the curves. My headlights caught the slow children sign that hadn't seen a kid in 20 years, then swept past Miller's abandoned barn, the one that had been leaning the same way since we were boys. Funny how some things never change, while others... Ever get that feeling in your gut that something's off? Like when you walk into your house and notice a picture frame tilted just wrong? I turned onto Thomas's gravel drive around 9, letting the car idle under his porch light. That's when I saw it, Margaret's silver sedan, tucked up near his garage like it belonged there. The engine ticked as it cooled, telling me it hadn't been there long. My ribs squeezed tight like they used to in the mill when I had to squeeze between the hot rollers to clear a jam. The dash clock read 9:17. Margaret had said she was having coffee with Jean from her garden club. Jean, who'd had hip surgery 3 weeks ago and couldn't drive. I killed the engine and sat there, bourbon bottle cold against my palm. The air outside smelled like wet cedar from the afternoon rain, mixed with dust kicked up from the gravel. Through Thomas's front window, lamplight spilled yellow across his lawn. Somewhere inside, music played low, one of those old jazz records he collected. Then I heard it. Laughter. Not Thomas's usual boom, but something softer, shared. Something that didn't include me. My knees crackled as I stepped out of the car. Each footstep on the gravel felt loud enough to wake the county, but the voices inside didn't pause. 3 concrete steps led to his door, same ones we'd helped Dad pour back in '82. I remembered Thomas dropping his end of the wheelbarrow, cursing as wet concrete slopped over his boots. I raised my knuckles to knock, but stopped. Through the door, I could hear them talking, voices too low to make out words. Remember when you were a kid pressing your ear to the wall when your parents were discussing Christmas presents? That same guilty feeling washed over me. Now, but I couldn't step back. A whisper. Margaret's whisper. I'd know it anywhere. The same tone she used when she'd lean close at church to comment on someone's hat, or tell me dinner was burning while we had company. Then silence, followed by the gentle clink of glass against glass. That sound used to mean home to me, Margaret pouring evening tea, or Thomas and I sharing a drink after a long day's work. But this clink felt different. Secret. Wrong. I gripped the bourbon bottle tighter, feeling the cool glass against my palm. The porch boards creaked under my weight as I leaned closer to the door, its wood grain rough against my forehead. Part of me wanted to turn around, drive home, and pretend I'd never left my garage. But 50 years of marriage teaches you when something's broken, even if you can't see the crack. You ever stand at the edge of a high place, knowing the next step will change everything? That's where I was. My hand wrapped around that bottle of bourbon meant for celebration, Listening to my wife laugh with my brother behind a closed door, I pressed my ear against the wood, hardly breathing, hoping to hear one sentence, just one, that would explain why Margaret's car sat cooling in my brother's driveway on a Tuesday night when she was supposed to be across town drinking coffee with Jean. Through that painted pine, their voices wove together like smoke. Too soft to catch the words, but I knew those tones. Margaret's laugh, the one she used to save for our morning coffee when the kids were still asleep. Then Thomas's deeper chuckle answering hers, like they were sharing some private joke I wasn't meant to hear. You know that moment when your whole world tilts sideways, but your feet are still planted on level ground? That's where I was standing. A sound drifted through the door that took me straight back to our kitchen, the kind of sound that belongs after dinner plates are cleared and lights are low. Not here, not now, not them. My hand found the doorknob. Funny how cool metal can burn worse than mill steel ever did. I turned it slow, part of me still hoping I'd find them playing cards or looking through old photos. Anything but what my gut was screaming. The door swung in silent as church, and that porch light hit them like God's own spotlight. Margaret sat perched on the arm of Thomas's recliner, her hand frozen halfway to his shoulder. Her face, Lord, her face. I'd seen that same startled look the time I caught her wrapping Christmas presents at midnight, except this wasn't any Christmas surprise. Thomas stood beside her, mouth hanging open like a fish on my line, his shirt untucked and wrinkled where it shouldn't be. You ever notice how silence has different flavors? This one tasted like ash. The bourbon bottle slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a thud that should have shattered it, but it just rolled there, intact, making lazy circles on Thomas's hardwood floor like it was mocking me. "Ray," Margaret started, but whatever excuse she had lined up died right there. Thomas took a step forward, hands raised like he was approaching a spooked horse. "Brother, let me—" I backed away, my breath coming out like winter air, though it was middle of August. The curtains in his front window shivered in the air conditioning, and I swear they looked embarrassed to have witnessed what I just had. Walking back to my car felt like moving through deep water. Every step fought me, like my boots had turned to concrete, the same concrete Thomas and I had poured for Dad's driveway all those years ago. Funny what memories surface when your mind's trying to dodge the present. My hands found the steering wheel, gripping it tight enough to leave marks. I stared at Thomas's house number, 2147 Oak Street, where we'd helped him move in 15 years back. The numbers blurred together until they were just black smudges against white siding. You ever sit in your car and feel like you're watching someone else's life fall apart? Through my windshield, I saw Ruth Peterson's blinds twitch next door. Ruth, who'd brought us casseroles when Margaret had her hip replaced. Ruth, who'd see Margaret's car in this driveway and know exactly what it meant. By tomorrow, her pity would be making its way through the garden club, the church circle, the whole damn town. I could already see it. The sideways glances at the grocery store, the sudden quiet when I walked into Jerry's diner for my morning coffee, the careful way people would ask how I was doing. 50 years of respect in this town, and now I'd be the old fool who couldn't keep his wife from straying with his own brother. But I wouldn't give them a show. Not tonight. Not while the truth was still raw enough to make me shake. I sat there, engine off, watching shadows move behind Thomas's curtains. They were probably scrambling to piece together explanations, rehearsing whatever story they thought might patch this up. As if anything could explain away what I'd just seen, the porch light still burned bright as judgment. Margaret's car sat there like evidence in a crime scene, and somewhere behind those trembling curtains, my wife and my brother were living in a moment I couldn't unknow. Morning hit me like a hammer. The kitchen clock ticked away, each second dropping like a judge's gavel in the quiet house. I dozed off in my chair sometime after midnight. Still, in yesterday's clothes, my neck stiff as rusted pipe. You know that moment when you first wake up and for just a breath everything's normal? That moment didn't last long. I shuffled to the coffee maker, the same one Margaret and I bought during Carter's presidency, still brewing strong while other things fell apart. The first sip hit wrong, metallic, like drinking straight from an old tin cup. Maybe it was the coffee, maybe it was the taste of everything else going sour. That's when I saw it, a white envelope lying flat against the welcome mat, peeking under the front door like a snake in the garden. Legal courier's mark in the corner. My hands didn't shake when I picked it up, and I'm still proud of that. Petition for dissolution of marriage, it read at the top, typed up neat and proper, like it wasn't demolishing 50 years of promises. I scanned through pages of legal language until I hit the allegations. Each paragraph painted me like some confused old man, wandering around in his own shadow. Exhibited signs of cognitive decline, increasingly erratic behavior, concerns about financial decision-making capacity. They'd turned my steadiness against me. All those quiet years of thinking before speaking, measuring twice before cutting once, now they were twisting that into something else. Something diminished. I reached for the phone, dialed Jenny first. My daughter's always been the practical one. But her hello came with a hesitation, thick as motor oil. "Dad, is everything okay? You sound—" "I'm fine, Jenny. Just wanted to—" "Did you forget? We talked about this yesterday. We hadn't spoken in 3 days. That rock in my stomach got heavier. Listen, sweetheart. Maybe you should rest, Dad. We can talk later." Next was Michael, my son. He picked up, on the 4th ring, distracted, probably standing in that fancy office of his. "Hey, Dad, everything all right? Your mother filed for divorce this morning." A pause. Papers shuffling. "Yeah, she mentioned she might." "Look, Dad, maybe it's time to take it easy, you know? Let the lawyers handle things. Take it easy like I was some old engine that needed cooling down." Through my kitchen window, I watched Mrs. Peterson power-walking past, phone pressed to her ear. The gossip was already flowing, finding its channels like water downhill. I could hear Thomas's voice in the whispers. "Concerned about Ray," he'd say, shaking his head just so. "Signs we've all been noticing." The lawyer's office smelled like leather and lemon polish. Young fellow, but his eyes were steady. "Gather every document you can," he told me. "Bank statements, pension records, property deeds. And, Mr. Ellison, this will take patience. And cash." Back home, I pulled out my old metal file box, the one Margaret used to tease me about, calling it my conspiracy vault. Inside, every paper was filed just so. 30 years of pension statements, property tax records, bank transfers, all lined up like soldiers waiting for inspection. My hands felt steadier just touching them. Numbers don't lie, not like people do. Each page was a brick in the wall I'd built around our life, and now that wall would serve a different purpose. The phone buzzed, unknown number. I let it ring, watching it dance across the kitchen table. Maybe it was Margaret calling to explain. Maybe it was Thomas, trying to patch things up with some story about how it wasn't what it looked like. But no apology came. Just that buzz, then silence, then the clock counting out more seconds like a judge waiting for evidence. I looked down at the divorce papers again. They wanted to paint me as a man losing his grip. Fine, but they'd forgotten something important. The quietest tools in the shop are often the sharpest. The law office sat above a dentist's practice, and both kinds of pain felt about right that morning. The elevator wheezed like it needed retirement too, and maybe that's why I took the stairs, just to prove I still could. You ever notice how photocopiers sound like summer? Insects when they're running? That's what filled the air while I sat across from Bradley Morris, attorney at law. Young enough to be my grandson, but his eyes had that steady look I recognized from the better foremen I'd known, the ones who could spot trouble before it jammed the works. "Mr. Ellison," he said, spreading papers across his desk. "Let's talk numbers." Numbers. I'd spent 50 years dealing with numbers. Steel gauges, production, quotas, pension calculations. But these numbers hit different. Retainers 5,000, he started. Filing fees another 800. If we need experts, and given their angle about your competency, we will. That's another few thousand each. My mouth went dry. "Each?" He nodded, tapping his pen against the desk. "Medical evaluation to prove you're sharp as ever. Financial expert to trace assets. Maybe more, depending on how they play this." I pulled out my reading glasses, the ones Margaret always said made me look distinguished, and studied the figures. My savings account had been healthy enough for a quiet retirement. Fishing gear, grandkids' birthdays, maybe a new deck for the house. Now those digits were melting faster than April snow. "The house," Morris said, and my spine went straight. "That's going to be the big one. The house. Our house. The one I'd bought when steel was king. And River Street was where working folks could still afford to dream. Where I'd taught Michael to ride his bike, where Jenny had her graduation party, where every Christmas had smelled like Margaret's sugar cookies and pine needles. What about it? Morris leaned forward. Unless we contest with solid evidence within 90 days, the court will order it listed and sold. Assets split 50-50, minus fees. 90 days? The words came out like I was tasting poison. From today. He circled a date on his calendar. That's our deadline to prove your case. The drive home felt longer than usual. The sun was settling behind the cottonwoods, painting everything in that golden light that usually meant peace but now just meant time running out. I spread the bills across my kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned vacations, helped with homework, shared 30 years of Sunday dinners. I could see the river through my window, steady as always. The calendar hung on the wall like a judge's verdict, and I took out my red pen, the one I used to mark important dates, back when important meant birthdays and anniversaries instead of deadlines. Day 90. I circled it hard enough to leave an impression on next month's page. You want to know the worst part? It wasn't just money bleeding out. It was dignity. Everything I'd built, everything I'd saved, everything I'd planned was turning into legal fees and expert witnesses just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. I looked at those calendar squares, wondering if I could stretch them like steel in the mill. But time's the one thing you can't work over, can't reshape, can't make give even an inch. The empty porch flashed through my mind. No rocker, no fishing rod leaning against the rail, no grandkids running through the screen door that always needed fixing. Just bare boards and a for sale sign stabbed into the lawn I'd cut every Saturday for 3 decades. Gravel crunched in the driveway, and my head came up sharp. Headlights swept across the kitchen wall, held for a moment, then moved on. Probably just someone turning around, but it got me thinking about tomorrow. A man can step aside, let the river take what it wants, or he can plant his feet and fight the current, even if it costs him every dollar he's got. I looked at that red circle again. 90 days to prove who I was. 90 days to save what was mine. 90 days to show them all what taking it easy really meant. The Bell Diner hadn't changed since I first walked in 40 years ago. Same cracked vinyl booths, same coffee-stained menus, same morning light fighting through windows that needed washing. I'd called Frank the night before, voice probably shakier than I wanted to admit. Corner booth, he'd said. 7 sharp. Frank was already there when I walked in, his work-scarred hands wrapped around a mug like he was trying to squeeze the warmth right out of it. He'd been my shift supervisor for 20 years before moving up to foreman, the kind of man who could spot a hairline crack in a steel beam from 30 feet away. "Ray," he nodded as I slid in across from him. "You look like hell." That got a small laugh out of me. "Feel worse." Judy, who'd been pouring coffee here since Carter was president, brought me a mug without asking. Steam curled up from the chipped rim, carrying that burnt smell that meant it had been sitting on the warmer too long. Just the way I liked it. "So," Frank said, "tell me what's really going on. Not the garbage those vultures are spreading." I pulled out the folder I'd brought, pension records, property deeds, bank statements, and spread them across the Formica tabletop. The same documents I'd kept filed away all these years, each one stamped and dated, each telling its own piece of the story. "Remember that Christmas blackout?" Frank asked suddenly, his finger tapping one of the pension statements. "Power went down across 3 counties, 0 degrees outside. Everyone wanted to shut the line down, send the crews home. Had to keep the metal moving," I said. "Once it cools in those rollers, whole system's shut," he finished. "But you stayed. Kept that line running on generator power and pure stubbornness for 16 hours straight. Saved the company about $500,000 worth of equipment." My throat tightened. "That was a long time ago. Same man sitting here now." Frank leaned forward, tapping the columns of numbers like he used to count rivets on an inspection. "These numbers, they're your proof, your generator power. They tell the real story, not whatever tale your brother's spinning. You know that feeling when someone reminds you who you are, not who you've been feeling like lately, but who you really are down in your bones." That's what Frank was doing, and I could feel something spark back to life inside my chest. "Look at these pension contributions," he said, pointing to a row of figures. "Steady as a heartbeat for 50 years. That's not a man who's slipping. That's a man who knows exactly what he's doing." The coffee didn't taste so bitter anymore. For the first time since finding Margaret's car in that driveway, I felt something besides shame and anger. Something that felt like strength. "What's your next move?" Frank asked. I tapped the folder. Meeting Morris, my attorney, this afternoon, filing some preliminary motions. Good, Frank nodded. Make 'em sweat. We finished our coffee and Frank insisted on paying. As he stood to leave, he gripped my shoulder. Remember, Ray, you're still the guy who kept that line running. Don't let anyone tell you different. I drove straight to Morris's office, folder tucked securely beside me. We spent 3 hours going over everything, preparing the filings. Morris seemed pleased with the documentation, said it showed a pattern of stability that would be hard to dispute. This should slow them down, he said, sliding the papers into a manila envelope. I watched him stamp and seal each document, imagining the clock hands dragging just a little slower with each one. Maybe now the whispers would stop. Maybe now they'd see. But when I got home that evening, the house feeling bigger and emptier than ever, there was an email waiting. Morris's subject line told me everything before I even opened it. Motion denied, technical issues. I read it twice, not wanting to believe it. My brother's lawyer had anticipated every argument, found every procedural crack, and gotten the whole thing thrown out before it could even be heard. The room seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. All that work, all those carefully kept records, and they'd swatted it away like it was nothing, like I was nothing. I looked out at the river, its surface going dark with twilight, the same river that had seen 50 years of my life flow past, that had watched me build everything I was about to lose. The next 7 days felt like pushing water uphill. Every morning started with a fresh stack of papers and ended with another dead end. I'd walk into offices with my folder tucked under my arm, trying to look more like the mill foreman I used to be than the desperate old man they probably saw. I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison, but we can't notarize without... Unfortunately, the witness isn't available to... You'll need additional documentation to verify... Ever notice how rejection always comes wrapped in politeness? Like putting a bow on a brick before they throw it at you. The phone became my enemy. Every call brought another unfortunately or regrettably or at this time. Even people I'd known for decades suddenly couldn't remember clear enough to sign a statement. Funny how memory works that way. Selective, like a faulty circuit breaker. I baked Sarah's favorite chocolate chip cookies before driving over to my daughter's place. Used the recipe her mother taught me back when Sarah was knee-high, the one that called for extra vanilla and brown sugar pressed down firm in the measuring cup. The same cookies that used to make everything better when she was little. "Dad," she said, setting her untouched cookie on the coffee table. Her voice had that careful tone people use in hospitals. Maybe it's time to think about settling. My chest squeezed tight. "Sarah, I'm worried about you. All these legal papers, all this fighting." She reached for my hand. "Mom's lawyer says they're willing to be reasonable." Reasonable, that word again. Like it was reasonable to throw away 50 years, like it was reasonable to watch my own brother smile while he did it. "I'm not slipping," I said, but even I could hear the tired in my voice. "I know what I'm doing. Nobody's saying you're..." She stopped, sighed. "Just think about it, okay? For me?" I drove home with the cookies sitting cold in their tin. Filed my second motion the next morning, this one with an amended affidavit that Morris said might work. 3 days later, the judge declined to even hear it. No explanation. Just another polite no. The nights got longer after that. I'd sit on the porch with the light off, ledgers spread across my lap, wearing down pencils to nubs while I checked and rechecked numbers that refused to change. The river kept flowing past, steady as ever, not caring one bit that my world was coming apart at the seams. Remember when that sound used to help me sleep? Now it just reminded me how time keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. Another week gone. Another red X on the calendar, eating up those 90 days like a hungry thing. I started packing a banker's box for attempt number 3, but my hands felt heavy. Everything felt heavy. For the first time, I let myself really consider giving up. Just stopping. Sign the papers, take whatever they offered, find a little apartment somewhere. Maybe one of those senior living places with the neat little gardens out front. The kind of place that promises peace and quiet, even if it's really just surrender dressed up nice. The thought sat there like an old chair, worn and comfortable, inviting me to sink down and rest. Wouldn't it be easier? Wouldn't it hurt less? I was flipping through the family trust ledger one last time, more habit than hope by then, when something caught my eye. An entry from 6 years back, right after Dad died, and Robert took over as trustee. The numbers looked right at first glance, but something about the pattern. I pulled out my reading glasses, held the page closer. The distribution amounts matched what they should be, but the totals, I grabbed my calculator, started punching in figures. The math didn't work. I did it again. Slower this time, checking each number twice. Still wrong. Not by much, just a few thousand each quarter, but wrong enough that it couldn't be accident. My hand started shaking as I flipped forward, checking more recent entries. The pattern was there, subtle as a whisper, but clear as day once you knew what to look for. A little bit here, a little bit there, flowing out of the trust like that river outside my window, right into my brother's pocket. I spread those trust statements across my kitchen table like I used to lay out blueprints at the mill. The brass lamp, the one Martha picked up at that antique store in Butler 30 years ago, cast a warm circle that made the papers look older than they were. Funny how some things stick with you. I could still read financial statements the same way I used to trace electrical diagrams, following the flow, until I found the short. You ever notice how things hide better in plain sight? Those numbers had been right there all along, neat and tidy in their columns. But now, with my glasses on and my mind clear, I could see what I'd missed. Round withdrawals always when I was pulling double shifts at the mill. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. Timing so perfect it had to be planned. Well, would you look at that? I muttered, tapping my pencil on a particular entry. The beneficiary code caught my eye. RWE Holdings LLC. I remembered Robert mentioning his small business venture at Dad's funeral, right before he volunteered to manage the trust. Said it would be easier for everyone that way. I grabbed a fresh legal pad and started writing it all down. Date, amount, memo, recipient. My hand was steady, steadier than it had been in weeks. The pattern emerged like a blueprint coming into focus. Every market upswing, every bonus season, a little more disappeared. Not enough to raise alarms, just enough to bleed it slow. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight when I finally reached for the phone. Frank picked up on the third ring, sounding awake as ever. That man never did sleep much. "Frank, I need your eyes on something," I said, then started reading numbers. Dates, amounts, the whole pattern laid bare. He listened without interrupting, just like he used to when we were tracking down equipment failures. When I finished, the line went quiet for 3 heartbeats. "Ray," he said finally, and I heard that old foreman tone creep in, the one that meant he'd found the problem. "That's not creative accounting, that's theft, friend, plain and simple." My throat tightened. "You're sure? 30 years running maintenance budgets? I know cooking books when I smell it." He paused. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" I looked at the papers spread before me, thought about the metal box waiting in my study. First thing tomorrow, I'm printing everything I can find. Bank, archives, transfer records, all of it. Then I'm getting certified copies made. Smart, evidence needs backup. Yeah, I started gathering the statements, careful to keep them in order. "Listen, Frank, thanks for everything. Get some sleep, Ray. Sounds like you've got work ahead." After we hung up, I spent another hour making copies and tucking the originals back into their metal home. The box closed with a solid click that reminded me of throwing the main breaker at the mill, that moment when you knew everything was locked down tight. Outside, someone laughed at Ruth's place next door, probably her grandkids visiting again. The sound drifted through my window, carefree and simple, while I sat there in my kitchen wondering about judges and evidence and admissibility. "Will they even let this in?" I asked the empty room. The brass lamp just kept shining its steady light on papers. That might save me, or might not mean a damn thing in court. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 75 years. The trust statements were secure, the copies ready, and somewhere in all those numbers lay the truth about my brother. Whether that truth would matter to anyone else? Well, that was tomorrow's problem. For now I had what I needed. Proof that the steady man wasn't slipping. Proof that some betrayals leave paper trails. Proof that my brother had been picking both our pockets while he was picking apart my life. The law office looked different in the pre-dawn gray, more like a confessional than a business. My shoes clicked down empty halls, while fluorescent lights buzzed to life overhead, making that sound that always reminded me of the mill's backup generators kicking in. Ted, my attorney, was already at his desk when I arrived. He had that worn look of someone who'd been staring at papers too long. kind of like how our quality control guys used to look near the end of a double shift. "Morning, Ray," he said, not looking up. "You said this was important." I set my briefcase on his desk, the same one I'd carried to contract negotiations back in '82. The brass clasps made that satisfying click when I opened them. "Remember how you said we needed something solid?" I pulled out the trust statements, all certified copies stamped and dated. "Take a look at these. You know that moment when you're showing someone something important and you can tell exactly when they get it?" Ted's eyebrows started climbing about halfway down the first page. By the third statement, he was sitting up straighter. "These withdrawals," he said, tapping the paper with his pen, "all tied to your brother's LLC. Every single one." I kept my voice steady, just like I used, to when reporting equipment failures to the board. "And notice the timing. Always when I was working overtime, when I wouldn't be checking the statements." Ted spread the papers across his desk like he was dealing cards. "This changes things, Ray. Significantly." He looked up at me. "What do you want to do with it?" Now, some folks might have wanted to make a big show right then, call press conferences, throw accusations around. But I'd learned long ago that the loudest voice isn't always the winning one. "File it quiet," I said. "Motion to compel discovery. Notice to include trust records. Nothing fancy." Ted nodded slowly. "And your brother?" "Your wife. Let them think they're winning." I remembered how brother looked at the last hearing. All confidence and practiced concern. Smugness makes people careless. We spent the next hour preparing the filings. While Ted typed, I watched the sun climb over the city buildings, painting them gold like fresh-poured steel. When he finished, I signed where he pointed, and that was that. No fanfare, no drama, just papers filed with the clerk's stamp marking the time. Back home, I opened my calendar and circled day 72 in red. The court date. 18 days left before everything would either fall apart or come together. I'd been counting down from 90, watching each day tick by like seconds on a pressure gauge. That evening I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, practicing what I'd say on the stand. "Yes, Your Honor." I continued contributing to the family trust. Pause. Breathe. "No, Your Honor." I was not aware of the withdrawals at the time. Keep it simple, keep it clear. Calm is its own kind of armor. You ever notice how preparing for something big makes time move strange? Those next few days seemed to stretch and compress all at once. I laid out my court suit, the charcoal one I'd worn to my daughter's wedding, polished my shoes until they reflected the ceiling, organized my documents into folders, then reorganized them, then did it again. Brother and wife got quieter as the days passed. The whispers about my condition died down to murmurs, then to nothing. Maybe they thought they'd won already. Maybe they thought I'd given up. Either way, their smugness settled in like dust on a shelf, and I let it lie there undisturbed. The night before court, I took my usual spot on the porch. The river kept its steady rhythm below, counting seconds like it always had. A half moon hung above the trees, casting just enough light to see the current's ripples. "Will the judge even look at the trust records?" I asked the night air. The question felt heavier in the darkness, like it was made of something more solid than words. The river didn't answer, of course. It just kept flowing, patient and constant, while I sat there thinking about judges and evidence and all the things that might or might not happen when that courtroom door opened tomorrow morning. The courthouse looked smaller than I remembered from jury duty years back. Maybe it was the early morning shadows, or maybe everything shrinks when you're carrying that much weight on your shoulders. The marble steps had the same worn patches, though, right where thousands of feet had traveled up seeking their own kind of justice. Inside, the main courtroom still had those old ceiling fans spinning lazy circles overhead. Their quiet click, click, click took me right back to the mill. Same rhythm as the conveyor belts when they were running true. Funny how some sounds follow you through life, isn't it? I smoothed my tie as I took the stand, feeling the rough calluses on my fingertips catch the silk. Ted had prepped me well. Speak clearly, stay focused, answer only what's asked. The oath felt solid in my mouth, like a promise I'd been keeping all along. "Mr. Ellison," Ted began, "could you tell the court about your employment history?" 50 years at Riverside Steel, I said, keeping my voice steady. Started on the line in '73, worked up to shift supervisor, retired last spring. The words came easy. They were just facts, after all. And during that time, what contributions did you make toward your marital home? I walked them through it. The down payment from my overtime hours, the mortgage payments that never missed a month, the improvements paid for with my Christmas bonuses, all of it documented, all of it clean as a fresh welded seam. Linda's lawyer, sharp suit, sharper voice, kept popping up like a spring valve. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? The judge, older than me, with eyes that missed nothing, leaned forward. I'll allow limited scope. Proceed. Ted nodded and pulled out the pension ledgers. Your Honor, I'd like to submit these as Exhibit A. He handed them up, then turned back to me. Mr. Ellison, could you explain these records? You could hear those fans clicking in the silence. I traced each column with my finger, translating numbers into years of early mornings and late nights. These show every contribution from 73 forward. The house payments, the trust deposits, all of it came from my wages. The jury followed along, 12 pairs of eyes moving like quality inspectors checking a production run. One woman in the back row nodded slightly, like she was adding up her own columns in her head. Through it all, I kept catching glimpses of Linda and brother in my peripheral vision. They sat there looking like they were watching a rerun they'd seen before, trading whispers and thin smiles. Brother even checked his watch once, like he had somewhere better to be. Ted moved methodically through the chain of title next. Every deed, every transfer, every document showing how that river house had grown from dream to reality. The kind of paper trail you can only build by doing things right, year after year. Your Honor, Ted said finally, we'd like to introduce evidence regarding the family trust. The room got a degree cooler. Linda's lawyer stood up so fast his chair squeaked. Objection! The trust is completely separate from... Counsel. The judge held up one hand. Based on the foundation laid regarding Mr. Ellison's contributions, I'll review the trust documents for relevance. She looked straight at me. If the foundation holds, we'll proceed. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, careful to keep it quiet. Across the room, Brother's smile flickered just a fraction. Linda's fingers tightened on her purse strap. The fans kept their steady click, click, click overhead, counting minutes like they were checking off shifts. I sat straight in that witness chair, feeling solid ground under my feet for the first time in weeks. Not victory, not yet, but something close to it. The chance to show what truth looks like when you lay it out in black and white. Ted pulled out a fresh stack of papers, and I swear the air got thicker. You know that feeling when you're about to watch something you can't take back? That's what filled that courtroom. Your Honor, I'd like to submit these text message records as Exhibit D, Ted said, smooth as steel. He handed copies to the clerk, who passed them around like playing cards. These communications are between Linda Ellison and James Ellison, dated 3 months ago. I watched Linda's face change. Just a flicker, but I'd seen that look before. The same one she'd worn when I caught her at Brothers that night. Her attorney leaned in close, whispering something urgent, but the damage was already rolling. Ted started reading. March 15th, 7:42 p.m., from Linda to James. We need to move faster on the timeline. Ray's getting suspicious. He paused, letting that sink in. Response from James, 7:45 p.m. Don't worry, once we price the house low enough, it'll sell in weeks. The jury straightened up like someone had hit a switch. One man in the front row actually wrote something down. I kept my eyes forward, but I could feel Linda shifting in her seat. March 16th, 10:13 a.m., Ted continued. Linda to James. Called the realtor. She says we can list as soon as the papers are filed. He looked up. Your Honor, I'd like to direct attention to Exhibit E. Bank records showing a series of property valuations ordered that same afternoon. The judge was studying the documents like a blueprint, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light. She had one of those faces that gave nothing away, but her pen kept moving, marking spots that probably didn't help Linda's case. Ted laid it out like a foreman explaining a production schedule. Texts, bank records, realtor contacts, all of them matching up neat as survey marks. Every message had its timestamp, every plan its paper trail. Linda kept her eyes locked on the table while her story fell apart in numbered exhibits. Your Honor, Ted said, these communications clearly show collusion to undervalue marital assets prior to filing. We ask the court to consider this when determining settlement distributions. The judge set down her pen. Even the ceiling fans seemed to slow down and listen. Given the evidence of misconduct, she said, This court cannot support the original settlement proposal. She looked straight at Linda. Mrs. Ellison, your claim to 50% of the accelerated home sale proceeds is hereby reduced. The court will determine final percentages after reviewing additional testimony regarding the trust accounts. A chair scraped back. Linda's. For the first time since that night at Brother's door, she had nothing to say. Her lawyer's hand shot out to steady her arm, but she stayed standing, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. I glanced at the wall clock. 2:15 p.m. on day 75 of their 90-day plan. All those careful arrangements about quick sales and split profits, gone like smoke up a stack. The house they'd tried to rush to market would stay right where it was, at least for now. The judge shuffled some papers, then looked toward Brother's side of the room. James Ellison, she said, please approach the witness stand. Brother stood up slow, straightening his tie like he was heading into a business meeting, but I noticed his fingers weren't quite steady. Maybe he was thinking about those trust documents still waiting their turn, all those numbers that didn't add up to anything honest. The clerk started administering the oath, and I watched. Brother raise his right hand. There was a small coffee stain on his cuff, something he never would have allowed in the old days. Funny the details you notice when your whole world's shifting on its axis. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? The clerk asked. Brother's "I do" came out a little rough around the edges. He cleared his throat and sat down, adjusting his jacket like armor. The fans kept their steady count overhead while Ted gathered his next set of papers. I thought about that metal file box at home, all those careful records I'd kept. Sometimes the best revenge isn't the loud kind. It's just the truth finally getting its day in court. Ted picked up the remote and clicked. The first slide hit the screen like a spotlight. Q3 2015. Simple columns, dates, and numbers, the kind of thing I'd looked at my whole career without seeing the story they told. Your Honor, Ted said, I'd like to walk through a pattern that emerged during Mr. Raymond Ellison's final years at the mill. He advanced to the next slide. Here we see a $5,000 withdrawal from the family trust, dated September 15, 2015. I glanced at Brother. He'd always worn suits like they were made for him, but today the shoulders hung wrong. Maybe integrity had been holding them up all those years. This withdrawal, Ted continued, coincides exactly with a period when Mr. Raymond Ellison was working extensive overtime during a facility upgrade. Another click. The funds were transferred to an LLC registered to James Ellison, River Vista Consulting. You know that silence that comes right before a storm? That's what filled the courtroom. Even the reporters stopped shuffling their papers. The pattern repeats. Click. Q4, 2015, $7,500. Withdrawal during holiday overtime. Click. Q1, 2016, $6,000 during the annual maintenance shutdown. Each slide matched my extra hours like they'd been planned that way. Because they had been. The judge leaned forward. Mr. James Ellison, did you have authority to make these withdrawals? Brother cleared his throat. I was a co-trustee, Your Honor. That wasn't my question. I remembered all those extra shifts I'd picked up, thinking I was building something solid. The coffee thermos at 4 a.m., steel-toed boots on cold concrete, and Brother signing papers in his warm office while I welded through winter. The trust agreement required both trustees to approve major withdrawals, Brother said, his voice getting smaller. The judge's glasses caught the light. Did Mr. Raymond Ellison approve these transfers? He was aware of the trust's general operations. A ripple went through the gallery. Even Linda looked away from him. Ted clicked again. 2017 through 2019 show the same pattern. Withdrawals ranging from $5,000 to $12,000, all during periods of documented overtime, all flowing to River Vista Consulting, LLC. The judge's pen hadn't stopped moving. Mr. James Ellison, what services did your consulting company provide to justify these payments? Brother shifted in his chair. The suit that used to look so natural on him now seemed to hang like borrowed clothes. General advisory services, Your Honor. Business development. Can you be more specific? We explored various opportunities. Each answer came shorter than the last. The reporter in the second row was writing so fast her pen might catch fire. The judge set down her glasses. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges regarding breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of trust assets. A murmur rolled through the courtroom, like thunder over the river. Brother's lawyer started whispering urgently in his ear, but Brother just sat there, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm issuing an immediate freeze on all trust assets pending full forensic accounting. I felt something shift in my chest. Not triumph exactly, but maybe the weight of all those betrayed years finally starting to lift. Like stepping onto my porch after a long shift, knowing the river was right where I'd left it. The projector hummed, throwing light and numbers on the screen. Simple math, really. The kind that doesn't lie once you know where to look. Brother had probably counted on me never looking close enough, or maybe he thought I'd be too ashamed to bring it all into the open. A few people in the gallery were already edging toward the doors, probably racing to be the first to spread the news. 50 years of Brother's careful reputation was unraveling in spreadsheets and bank transfers, each number another thread pulling loose. I caught Frank's eye in the back row. He gave me the same small nod he used to give when a weld passed inspection. Nothing showy, just acknowledgement of work done right. The judge was still talking, laying out terms for the forensic investigation, but I found myself thinking about that river behind my house, how it kept flowing no matter what people did on its banks, steady and patient, wearing down even the hardest stones, given enough time. Walking out of that courthouse felt like emerging from the mill after a double shift, tired but knowing the work was done right. The late afternoon sun hit me square in the eyes, and for a second, all I could see were camera flashes popping like welding sparks. Mr. Ellison, can you comment on the judge's ruling? What about your brother's involvement? How long has this been going on? You ever notice how news folks get hungrier when there's blood in the water? They weren't interested in my side of things when the rumors were flying about me slipping. But now that Linda and James had taken their hits, suddenly everyone wanted my words. I adjusted my tie, the blue one Frank had insisted would look better than black, and kept walking. Let them chase someone else's pain. I'd earned my quiet. The suit jacket draped over my arm felt lighter than it had this morning. Funny how justice can change the weight of things. Linda's settlement dreams had crumbled under those exhibits, showing her timeline messages with James. And my brother, well, his reputation was scattered across town like mill dust in a strong wind thanks to those trust documents. Mr. Ellison, just one statement. I shook my head, remembering how Dad used to say, a man's words mean most when they're fewest. The cameras followed me halfway down the block before finding someone else to chase. The walk home took me past Murphy's Hardware, where old Bill was sweeping the sidewalk. He looked up, caught my eye, and gave me that chin lift that working men use instead of words. News travels fast in small towns, and good news travels fastest when it proves people wrong. You know what I mean? How many times had folks walked past Bill's store these last months, whispering about poor Raymond losing his grip? Now they'd be walking past with different whispers altogether. The river came into view as I rounded Mason Street, and something in my chest loosened. Water has a way of washing things clean, even from a distance. I'd spent 50 years watching it flow past the mill, past my house, past all the small dramas we humans think are so important. My front porch waited exactly as I'd left it this morning, except now it felt more mine than it had in months. The steps didn't creak under my feet. They welcomed me home. I hung the suit jacket on the rail and reached behind the screen door where I'd left it. My old Fenwick rod, cleaned and polished last night, until the chrome guides shone like new money. Setting that rod against the porch rail might look like a small thing to most folks, but anyone who's ever had their piece stolen would understand. It wasn't just a fishing rod, it was tomorrow and next weekend, and every hour I'd earned back from worry. The cedar trees along the bank caught the afternoon light, their shadows stretching across my yard like nature's sundial. That sharp, clean scent, that always comes after rain filled my lungs. Some people pay good money for fancy candles that smell like this. Me? I just had to keep my house. I ran my hand down the rod's cork handle, smooth from years of early mornings and patient casts. The grip felt cool and familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend who never betrayed a trust. My palm settled into those worn grooves where it belonged, and something else settled too, right in that spot where the ache used to live. Remember when I said the river never lies? Well, it was still flowing steady as ever, not caring about courthouse drama or broken promises or even restored reputations, just moving forward like it always had, wearing down the rough edges of stones and stories alike. That's when it hit me clearest. Betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound because it comes from hands you trusted. But pride, the honest kind, earned through work and patience and standing your ground, that kind of pride heals strongest. I watched light dance off the chrome guides of my fishing rod, each flash a reminder of mornings to come. The river kept rolling past, carrying yesterday's troubles downstream where they belonged.